Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to EJC Online Classroom Platform. I am Arzella Miller, Vice Principal of Student Affairs and History Teacher at Kingsway High School. And this afternoon, I'll be looking on resistance and revolt. But before we go into the lesson, remember, we have to sanitize. So, I'm sanitizing. Yes. At least 3 seconds. Yes, we are sanitizing. You're not seeing me with my mask because it is not necessary now. And so, when I go outside, you will see me in my mask. Let us now invite the presence of the Lord in our midst. Great God and our eternal Heavenly Father, we pause at this moment to give you thanks. Thanks for allowing us to be here on this occasion, using this medium in which we can reach our children even in their homes. Father, continue to be with us and bless each and every one of us. In Jesus' name I pray. Now, the last time I met with you, we spoke about the layout of the plantation, the sugar plantation. Now, you will recall that a group of people called slaves work on these plantations. Now, let me take you back a little. What is slavery? What is slavery? Slavery is a principle in which property law is applied to another human being. Simple means that some other human being have the right and the authority to buy and sell another human. And you know that on these plantations, way back in the 18th century, slaves wanted to be free. Slaves wanted to be free. Amidst the brutal treatment that they received, they want freedom. Thus the topic, resistance and revolt. Now, they resist slavery, and they had a lot of rebellions because they did not want to be a slave, and so they wanted their freedom. So these planters are those who manages the slaves. They would put laws in place in order to control them. So we are now going to look on measures used, all the measures that were used to control these people who we call slaves, right? So colonial assemblies and individual planters used and instituted many methods that ensured slave population was subdued and that they were subservient, right? Simple means that they have to be below someone, right? Slave resistance. Slave resisted bondage in a variety of ways, active and passive ways. Although some forms varied, the common denominator in all acts of resistance was an attempt to claim some measure of freedom against an institution that defined people fundamentally as property. So can you imagine that a slave, a person deemed to be a slave, was not seen as a human, but a thing? Right? Because if a planter should say, you know, today I am going to sell my property, everything on there, human, along with machinery, and everything were on the same level. They were sold as property. They were treated as properties, right? And so the slave resisted in all forms, right? So these planters, they would put measures in place. One, economic measures, right? So if you are deemed to be a property, so you can't own anything. So these slaves were not given the privilege to buy, to own property, or to have anything because they weren't human. And you will recall, as Christian students attending a Christian high school, you must recall the story of the Israelites down there in Egypt, where they were in bondage for many years. But God is a God who is a loving God. He does not want any one of us to be treated like a slave. And so he asked Moses and Aaron to go to Pharaoh and ask Pharaoh to let my people go, because he had seen all that they were going through. And he did not want them to live like that. And so every one of us desire to be free, not to be treated as a property. And so God did not stop until he got the children of Israel out of Egypt and out of bondage. So you can see now why these people who were called slaves were trying to be free, because God is a God of freedom and he wants all of us to be free. So back to the economic laws, right? You could not buy, you could not own, because you were not deemed to be a human. So these are some of the economic sanctions that these planters would put in place so that the slaves could neither buy or sell or own properties. Now, not only economically, but psychologically, they would attempt to let these slaves feel that they were nobody. They were nobody. Psychologically, they acted upon their minds, right? They used the most derogative terms. For example, they tell them, you are black and ugly, right? Psychologically. And most times, these slaves believe it, that they were black and ugly. They saw everything bad about them. Psychologically, they were demotivated. You are black and ugly. Your hair is kinky and coarse. Your lips are big. You are nothing. You are nobody. And it takes us back in time. And do we see aspects of these psychological traits still existing among our people today? Because you are black. Sometimes we don't want to remain black. And you know that little thing that we rub on our skin to get light. Because if you're black, you should step back. And in Jamaica, as it is in the late 70s, that black people could get certain position. And so our people of the Caribbean sought ways and means to be among those who had light skin. And so psychologically, as a people, we have been affected. And another means of control was social control, right? Remember that these people were Africans, right? And so they brought along with them their culture. And these planters, white people, would speak so badly about the African culture. The African culture, that over a period of time, Africans did not want to practice their culture anymore. They speak so badly. No knocking of drums. Your culture is no good. They spoke so badly about the African culture that some of these cultural activities that these people used to carry out, they stopped doing them. Just as how even today in our country, for example, or Jamaica, a lot of our African culture has ceased long to exist because we don't want to associate with them anymore. Because we have been hearing over a period of time that these are not good. We want to have the culture of other people. So psychologically, again, we see how these planters did affect the slaves on the plantation. So, economic control, you can't have anything. Psychological control, you're worthless, you're no good, you're ugly. Social control, whatever you are practicing, your culture is nothing good. Those are worthless things. Don't even practice them until we don't want to do them anymore. And so, as we continue, we are now going to look on legal control, right? So, we have 3 main countries that used to deal with in slavery. First, we have the Spanish, and they had their laws, which they instituted. So the slaves had to live by these laws, right? And the Spanish law was called the Siete Partidas, right? Now, the slaves in the Spanish colonies, the planters were responsible for them, right? They were supposed to feed them, they were supposed to clothe them, they were supposed to find housing for them. And when the slaves got old and could not work, they were still responsible for them. That's the Siete Partidas. Now, these laws in the Spanish colonies were drawn up by the mother country, which is Spain, and sent to the different Caribbean islands so that they could institute them. Next, we have the French colonies. And the laws in the French colonies were known as the Code Noir. The Code Noir. And the French laws were similar to that of the Spanish laws. And the same things applied, where the planters were responsible for them, housing, food, clothing, and taking care of them in old age. And they, both in the Spanish and the French colonies, the slaves were given the right to marry and rear a family. So they had the right to have a family. Now, in the British laws, it was not so. The British law was more cruel than the French and the Spanish laws, because it was the same planters who made up these laws. Remember, I said to you that the laws that govern the Spanish and the French were handed down from the mother country. But in the British Islands, such as Jamaica, these laws were drawn up by the same planters. These same planters formed the government, and so that they could do anything that they wanted to do. Now, in the British colonies, slaves were not allowed to marry. They did not want to see families. They did not want to see any group of people. And so they only give them food. They give them a suit of clothing that should last for a year. And they did not take care of the elderly when they were not able to work. They did not take care of them anymore. It is said that historians have said that in the British Islands, you could see old people walking the streets, dying, no one to take care of them. So, of all the three colonies, the British one was the one that was most uncaring of their slaves. Now, because of all of these atrocities that were against these people, they come up with some form of setting themselves free. They wanted to be free. They could not continue to undergo the whipping every day. And we are going to shortly look on some type of resistance. They must resist this form of institution that treats them in such an inhumane way. And so I will step over here now, and we will look on types of resistance. So, you have been enduring a lot as a slave. Now you're going to put up some form of resistance. You want to be free, because as I said before, God did not make any one of us to be a slave. So we have here what we call active resistance, or another word that we can use for active is insurrectionary. Active or insurrectionary. Sometimes you go into exam students and you see active, or you will see insurrectionary. Now, active, as the word suggests, have action, right? So, the slaves would set up killing the livestock. Like, you know that on the plantation, you have horses, you have donkeys, you have assorted types of animals that would do different types of work on the plantation. For the horses would draw the carts with the canes, and the donkeys to help to carry water, and whatever was there for the animals to do, the slaves would attack and kill the livestock, right? Because they were attacking the system, right? So they would also murder plantation owner. Remember the last time we spoke about the domestic slaves? They were the ones who would be in the house of the master. They would do the cooking. And so, another form of resistance, they would put poison into the meals of the planters, and a lot of planters and their families got killed because the slaves, the domestic slaves who worked in the house, would put poison in their food. Right? Rebellions. And so, A lot of rebellions were planned. Sometimes they got foiled, but a lot of times they were carried out, rebellions, because they are rebelling against slavery. They are rebelling. They don't want to be in this condition. They want to be free. And so a lot of rebellions took place. And you will recall, students, we spoke about several rebellions, and one very big rebellion that put the lid on slavery was the Sam Sharp Rebellion, also known as the Christmas Rebellion, when the whole Western Jamaica was under fire because Sam Sharp told the slaves that they should not work on Christmas Day. And the Bible told him that no one should be a slave. And we know the famous statement made by Sam Sharp, "I rather die on yonder gallows than to be a slave." And that was exactly what happened, because Sam Sharp was hanged because of the Christmas rebellion. And also, a lot of other rebellions took place in the different islands across the Caribbean. Running away. Slaves would plan to run away from the plantation in large numbers, right? And running away, another word used for running away. So if you should go into exam and you see running away, maybe they can interchange this with marronage, right? So they run away in large numbers. And it is said that sometimes these slaves would boil different put bushes together and drink and just huddle together and die in large number. They prefer to die than to remain on the plantation being a slave. Right? We had looked on destruction of property. Yes, destruction of property simply means that the slaves would oftentimes wait until when the canes were nearing to mature, and then they would light the cane fields and destroy all those canes before it was time for harvesting. Right? They would destroy the tools also and the machinery, because when they destroy the tools and other machinery, no work could go on. So in everything you see here happening, it is a resistance against slavery, right? Burning of expensive clothing. Now this would apply to the domestic slaves who worked in the house. So the very expensive clothing for the mistresses, the plantation owners, the wives, they would overheat the iron and burn these expensive clothing. In those times, they used to starch clothing. So they would put too much starch in the clothes and have them all like that. And even scrubbing the expensive silk clothing, scrubbing them and tearing them up. That's a form of resistance. Also, the harming of babies. Yes? Sometime a mother would come and see her baby dead. It is said that domestic slaves used to take needles and put into the mold of the babies. And they could not find out what is wrong with the child. Because of that soft spot there, the mold, they would insert a needle in there. And so the baby would die. Right? So this is all active or insurrectionary resistance. Now I come over here where we have passive. The passive or non-insurrectionary. Now, Passive doesn't call for action, as burning down the plantation and rebellions that have a lot of actions. No, exaggerating female complaints, right? So we know that monthly complaint of the female, they would exaggerate that, and they can't do this, and cramps and pains and all of that. So they would go overboard. And they would malingering or pretending to be ill, right? Every day they're ill. Because if 10 minutes pass and they don't get to work, that's okay with them because they are resisting the system, right? So they would exaggerate any existing ailment, right? Historians will tell you that slaves with a cut would reopen the cut in order not to work. It is also said that sometimes these slaves would even try to put maggots into their cuts so that they prefer to lose a hand or a foot in order not to work. They would deliberately injure themselves because this is a win against slavery. Prolonging gestation. What is gestation? This applies to mothers who are breastfeeding. And so you'll have mothers trying to even prolong this period by breastfeeding babies up to all 2 years old. In order to leave, every minute they would leave to come to breastfeed their babies. Yeah, they're working, but every minute the baby wants to be breastfed, and so they would have to leave. So as I said to you, every 5 minutes, or no matter how small it is a win against slavery. Pretending not to understand instruction. So sometimes, for example, in the house, the slaves would burn something, drop something and break it, or do something. And when reprimanded, they would behave as though they were idiots. They didn't understand what the mistress or the planter they were saying. And even on the field, they behave as though they did not understand the instruction that was given to them. So pretending not to understand instruction. Telling lies. Yes, telling lies that would take a whole day sometimes to pacify. A whole day to pacify a lie on the plantation. But even this would be helping them to resist slavery. Stealing. Slaves, especially the house slave or the domestic slave, they would take out a lot of valuable things from the house and to go to the market. Remember, they used to go to the market on a Sunday. They call it Sunday market. And there they would steal from the house and go to sell at the Sunday market. Now you have another form of rebellion called the satire rebellion. I see some of this behavior among Caribbean women, right? On the plantation, we know that the planters used to want to have affairs with the slaves, the ladies on the plantation, or even the domestic female worker that lives in the house, in their house, they would want to have an affair with them. So other slave women would maybe get a hint as to what is happening, and they would go on the plantation, especially when the wife comes on the plantation, and then they would, Jamaican people would say, "Cho word." And then they would talk a lot of things as to give the wife a hint to say that this lady is having an affair with your husband, or your husband is having an affair with this lady. We call it satire rebellion, where they would make a lot of noise, curse the planter, curse the mistress, and the whole day would be spent pacifying and saying who said this or who said that. That's a whole lot of things that was happening on the plantation without any action. So, passive or non-insurrectionary. No great action was taking place. Making up unnecessary quarrels. Yes, unnecessary quarrels, a whole lot of noise and mischief on the plantation in order not to work. Slaves would even sometimes in the British colonies try to carry their masters to court. And even though they know that they weren't going to win the case, a day from the field is like 1,000 years to them. And they have won. They did not have to go on the plantation to work. So making of unnecessary quarrels. Drinking bush medicine to bring on diarrhea. So they know what bush to drink. They know what bush to put together to boil, to bring on a diarrhea. Or in some cases, historians will tell you that drinking of these bush, putting them together, could even cause a lady to have an abortion. Because these women would prefer that their babies die, whether by abortion or whether they were born and they didn't take care of them. They prefer they would die than to come to endure what they were enduring on the plantation. I've read about this lady by the name of Sabina Park, and that's how Sabina Park on Camp Road got its name, from a lady that was made prominent. She had a 3-year-old boy, and after slavery was abolished, you know, the planters would want to ask them to come back to work on the plantation. And she killed her son. She was tried in the halfway tree court for committing murder. She killed her son. And her remark was, I prefer to kill him than he going to work on Bakra Massa plantation. So these women and men would do anything not to allow their children even to go back on the plantation. They hated the plantation in such a way that some of them move away as far as possible that they could move from off the plantation. Now we are going to look now and some ways in which slaves were punished, right? There are some ways in which slaves were punished and some very gruesome acts that planters used to resist, to show slaves not to resist being a slave. And so we have flogging. We have flogging where slaves would be whipped and their flesh would come up on the whips. Some slaves would bleed to death because of the whipping that they would get from their masters. We have instances where slaves were made to walk on the treadmill, something spinning over, and they're walking, spinning over and over and over with them. And we have also where slaves were dismembered. A hand was cut off if you were caught stealing. A foot would be chopped off if you were caught trying to run away. You have ladies who were being raped by planters. Children as young as 9 years old were impregnated by planters who abused them. So on the plantation, these are some of the abuses that slaves, female as well as male, went through. Some males were, if they were caught, maybe sometimes lies were told on them that they were trying to rape a female, so their organs, their genitals would be cut off, so they would not be able to rape anymore. So these are some of the dehumanizing ways in which slaves were being abused on the plantation. See there, an instrument of torture, punishment to black slaves, instrument of torture. See there, look on the back of that man, pouring salt into wounds. After the beating with the whip, salt would be poured in those wounds. Another form of whipping, tied to that post and being whipped. Another form of punishment, shocking. Right? See there, must be some electric shocking being done to a slave. Right? And so we have seen here now why slaves would want to resist, because of a system that was set up to let them not live like a human being. And we see the many ways how they resisted this system that was set up against them. Now, I have here an exercise for you to practice. You are asked to describe the form of resistance which were used especially by women in their fight against slavery. And students, you will see that this question is allotted 12 marks. 12 marks. So based on the allotted marks, you know how much you should write. So I am looking on this question here to be at least 5 well-developed paragraphs. 5 well-developed paragraphs. It is an allotment of 12 marks. B, you are to outline 3 forms of resistance in which both men and women were involved. Not only women this time, but both men and women were involved. And 9 marks are allotted to this question. 9 marks. So based on the mark scheme, you will know how to write. And these must be well developed. I must say the content must be well developed. C, you are to give 2 ways in which women were punished for resistance activities. So women, maybe this woman was caught in the home putting poison into the meals of the planter. And so you are to give 2 ways in which women were punished for resistance activities. I hope that you did learn something from this lesson today, and that it has broadened your learning capacity, and that you will do well on your exams, and in the future you will be able to help someone as it relates to history. Thank you. God bless you.